Before we begin today's the second panel event of today, I'd like to acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the New Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people. I invite us all, as creators of culture, to help strengthen our relationship with Indigenous people and uphold the values of collaboration and inclusion in all that we do. Today I'm highlighting Indigenous creators and filmmakers within our community, and I'd like to shout out Shane Belcourt, a filmmaker working in documentary and narrative film. His debut feature film, Takaranto, was acquired by Super Channel, and he went on to many projects, including his most recent feature film, Red Rover, which opened up Canadian Film Fest in 2020. Yeah. His rightfully award-winning documentaries include Urban Native Girl and Indictment. They're so very insightful, so check out his work at shanebelcourt.com, where he lists everything he does, but what I love the most is that he adds being Claire's dad at the top of his list of accolades. It's pretty amazing. So thank you so much for coming back to the second last panel event of the industry series event of the Canadian Film Fest 2024, presented by Super Channel. I would like to shout out our community partners, Reelworld Screen Institute, for helping us get the word out about this panel today. Reelworld is a nonprofit which provides training programs and presents the acclaimed Reelworld Film Festival, which celebrates stories by racialized Canadians. The film festival is in its 24th year and going strong. Submissions are currently open at a 50% discount until April 12th. And a huge congrats to founder Tanya Williams on the 2024 Changemaker Award recipient for the CSAs. Pretty awesome. So what a unique opportunity that we have here today to be flies on the wall for a conversation with some incredible film programmers within the city. It's because of them that we get to bring our stories to their platform. So thank you, Laura Good, who programs for TIFF, Tribeca, Seattle, as well as the Canadian Film Fest, for bringing your amazing colleagues with you today and for this conversation we're about to hear. I'll pass the mic to you.
Thank you so much, Jen, and thank you so much to you all for being here. It's wonderful to see the faces of so many new filmmakers and returning veterans, as well as industry from across the sector. Small correction, I don't program for TIFF anymore. That was a past credit. But that leads me into our intros, because we have a fabulous panel here for us today. If I were to read all of their accolades and, credits, it would take me the entire duration of this panel. So please refer to the bios up on the screen, but I will give you the highlights. So first up, at the end of the aisle, please join me in welcoming Nora Wilner, who's the senior programmer for Canada and Industry Selects at TIFF, as well as a top film critic you might know from Now Magazine. We also have Richard Pierre, who programs here at the Canadian Film Fest, as well as for the Toronto Black Film Fest. Please join me in welcoming Richard. And next we have Marina Hanna, who is a programmer for Reelworld, who is one of our presenting partners today. Big hand for Marina. And then, of course, we have Andrew Murphy, who is the co-head and artistic director of Inside Out. I feel like everyone knows Andrew, so you're probably all acquainted. Big hand for Andrew. So I will open it up for a couple of questions at the end, so please have those ready in your mind if you have any for our esteemed panelists. But I'm first going to start off by asking if you could each speak to a little bit about what your festival in particular looks for when you're putting together your slate and what your particular perspective is, if you have any premiere requirements, if you have a niche. Why don't we start with you, Andrew, and then work down the line if Richard could pass down the mic.
No pressure. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming to listen to us. Masterclass of experience up here. I guess Inside Out is a queer film festival. Next year we celebrate our 35th anniversary. We're still going after COVID. You know, a lot of people are having a lot of hard times right now with festivals and nonprofit organizations. So we're very happy to be here, and thanks for asking us to be here. In terms of content, honestly, we just cast a wide net as possible, knowing that we are a specialty festival, and then kind of themes and things kind of present themselves as our programmers and our committees are watching stuff. So we tend to research through festivals and online, and then whatever's submitted unsolicited through Film Freeway, we just start to watch and see what kind of presents itself and see what works together. And from there, we start shortlisting and then try to put together a cohesive, curated 10 days that makes sense to people, or at least to us anyway. So.
Amazing. Thank you. Marina, do you want to talk a bit about Reelworld?
Sure. Not dissimilar to the way you program. We get the same submissions and we curate thematically depending on what comes up that year. And we do see things start to form. But where we differ maybe from any other festival, well, to an extent with the Black Film Festival, but at Reelworld, the focus is on the filmmaker, not necessarily the content. Obviously, we're looking for a certain level of film, but the filmmakers who submit to our festival are Canadian, and they are Black, Indigenous, and people of color. So that's what distinguishes it. Your content doesn't necessarily have to deal with themes of diversity, but the people, the person behind the camera would be of that origin. And Canadian, and in terms of premier status, what we require is at the very least an Ontario premier. Now that became tricky during the lockdown when a lot of film festivals went online, because I think at one time we were a Toronto premier. But what was happening is that when you're online, you technically premiere outside that city. So that complicated things a bit, and I think every festival in terms of premier status has those sort of issues. So it's something to keep in mind when you are applying, that premier status is often very important to a film festival. If it's not, they'll say so, but it's something to pay attention to.
And I'm very complicated, so I apologize right now. So I program for the Montreal International Black Film Festival and the Toronto Black Film Festival, and the requirements are pretty much the same for both festivals. And arguably what you're aiming for is somehow to deal with like Black reality, to have a Black actor in a major role. In terms of the filmmakers themselves, they don't necessarily have to be Black, but definitely representing sort of a Black reality and having like a Black protagonist is key. Beyond that, yeah, the premier status gets tricky. Like, I know for the Toronto Black Film Festival, we want Ontario. For Montreal, I believe it is a Montreal premiere. You'd have to like double check those guidelines to be sure. But yeah, the gist of it is, we'll say Black reality for both of those festivals. And for the love of God, don't have your film online, don't have it in theaters already. Because believe it or not, we actually do check these things. So, you know, you make me watch a great movie and then I click on some link and I'm like, oh, this already premiered. I've just wasted my time, but it was a good movie.
Don't anger a programmer.
Yeah, it's disappointing. I'm not going to hold it against you because we're all filmmakers and it's tough sometimes. For the Canadian Film Fest, ideally what we're looking for is a Canadian film, which seems rather obvious, but a Canadian film from a Canadian filmmaker. So you can shoot it really anywhere in the world as long as you're a Canadian filmmaker, you're eligible. We do try to represent, you know, as much of Canada as we can, so we would love it if, you know, we got every province covered. That's probably never going to happen, but maybe one day. We do want Toronto premieres. There is an exemption for that if you're a BIPOC creator, so that's pretty cool. So we waive that Toronto premiere status. I'm going to say that's sort of more or less it. What am I forgetting here?
I will just add that for us here, the BIPOC exemption is limited to films that haven't had too much exposure in Toronto, in the Toronto market.
Yeah.
So how well they've already been serviced in the city by wonderful festivals, many of them right here represented. So that's one stipulation I'll add.
And then just sort of one add-on this year, we expanded in terms of how many Toronto filmmakers we have. So we opened up the short film program. So if you're a Toronto short filmmaker, please, please, please submit. You know, we want to see your films.
Follow-up question. So for Canadian Film Fest, what if, say, like the producing team is Canadian, but you have an American director for hire or something? Like, do you have specific stipulations in terms of that, or do you kind of just gauge case by case?
I mean, I'll have to defer to Ashley to see if I'm getting this correctly, our festival director, but I believe it has to be either a Canadian producer or a Canadian director in our case. Is that correct? We've had a lot of conversations on a case-by-case basis around this, but I'm not sure what the hard and fast rule is.
Our preference is Canadian directors.
Preferences Canadian directors. So that's you in this room. And to Norm.
Yeah, we have a similar. I feel incredibly outclassed. I've only been doing this for a couple of years. I was a film critic. I worked all alone in the dark when the movies were done, and now I'm receiving them in embryonic stages, and then I get to show them to people, and it's honestly it's a thrill, and I'm going to chase that high for the rest of my life. But I'm only just doing this. This is my second official year it's my third official year as a programmer. The first year I was digital and industry, which meant I was harvesting what was available already. What the programmers chose came to me to then negotiate where it would go and if we could get it on a digital platform. And then, of course, Ravi Srinivasan died horribly and suddenly in January 23. And they said, "Can you do this?" And I said, "I honestly don't know," but we did. Kelly and I, Kelly Boutsalis, I mean, she's technically the associate, but we're really co-leads on the Canadian programming front. We put together a program last year. We're going to do it again this year, and it's incredibly daunting. But what TIFF looks for, I mean, TIFF is sort of the institutional footprint of the Canadian festival cycle, so I'm sort of inherited this incredibly large responsibility. We do look for world premieres whenever we can get them. We will program films from, at least in the Canadian section, we'll program films that are, I guess, international premiere, North American premieres, I guess we'd call them, things like Zohar Khan's In Flames, which premiered at Cannes last year, but then we had we basically were the second festival to screen it. I think there were a couple of others. Mademoiselle Canopsia played Locarno, and Humanist Vampire was at Venice before it came to us. But we were, love that movie. But I love all the movies. But we are absolutely looking for Canadian films from Canadian directors. Canadian financing is also great. Those are the qualifications for, it's all part of the Film Freeway process. As you submit, you get filtered into where you ought to be. And if the filmmaker's a Canadian citizen and there's Canadian funding, then it comes through me and Kelly, whatever it is. And maybe it ends up in Midnight Madness, because we don't have a Canadian program. TIFF hasn't had one since, I think, 2005, maybe, when they dissolved Canada First. And am I right about that?
Yes, but then the shorts didn't dissolve till International Shorts, which was in 2000. I was on that team.
10, 11.
I was the shorts associate that year. I think it was, I'm not going to guess, but it's been.
Yeah, I was already writing for Now
years.
when that happened, so that was after 2008.
Yeah.
But I mean, personally, I think we should have a dedicated Canadian program. This is not controversial. Jordy, thank you. Oh, I know it's being recorded. I'm on contract now. I can speak my mind. But the reality is, we absolutely try, Kelly and I, to find new voices, new treatments, new versions of old stories. I think is something people are really responding to right now. We're at a point where filmmakers, and I'm sure some of you are in this room are thinking about this, are engaging with the structure of genre and using it as a sort of a Trojan horse to get in the story that you want to tell. Kind of the way Jordan Peele used horror imagery and Get Out to do something completely original and different. You recognize it, you understand the tropes, and it's leading you in a certain direction. In Flames does that too. I mean, it's not really a ghost, if those of you have seen it, it's not really a ghost story, but there is something supernatural happening around the corners. That's the hook that gets you to understand what the movie is really about. Soderbergh does it with half of his movies these days too, where he plays with genre to make his point. And we've been seeing, I think it's because, I'm probably jumping ahead in the questions, but those last 3 years, I've seen this explosion of filmmakers using the trappings of horror, science fiction, fantasy to ground their stories, to actually, Violation, Madeline and Dusty's film, which is absolutely, on its face, it's what you would call a rape revenge movie, but that is not what they're doing, and it's so much deeper and harder than that. And that stuff has been really exciting to witness as a programmer, because this flood of material that comes in that's about one thing but really disguises itself to trick the audience. I just wonder if it's like a generation of filmmakers that are younger and cinema literate, and they've grown up wondering why nobody made, why no one in the 80s or 90s was really working with subtext that much in genre, and now here we are. But yeah, we look for premieres, we look for new voices, or if you're an established voice, maybe you're trying something new and saying something you haven't said before. World premieres are always going to be the gold standard, but we're open to things. I certainly, I absolutely understand the grind too. If you've made a movie for $175,000 and another festival is interested in showing it in August, there's no reason why you shouldn't think about that, because the movie is the thing that matters. And if the movie is good enough, we want to put it in front of people here regardless of who else might have seen it first. Sorry, that was a really long-winded, multi-layered answer.
That's amazing. Lots of gems there. You want to add something, Marina?
No, I thought of something while you were speaking, and I thought I'm going to take this opportunity and put it out to the audience who might be here, because you might be coming from all parts of the country. We do try to program filmmakers from across the country. We've struggled in the past to get filmmakers from the middle of Canada. We get a lot from British Columbia, but I would say the prairies and East Coast. So if you're out there, please find me and ask me questions about Reelworld, because we do want to get more filmmakers from that region. And I'll add just one more point when you talk about the types of stories. For us, we see a lot of emerging and independent filmmakers. You might not have the budget quite yet to fulfill your big vision, but we do look for stories with very much it's your point of view, that only something that you can bring to the screen. And that could be a very small story, but it's very poignant. And it doesn't have to be serious, it could be funny as well. But we've seen some really inventive and creative people come through when they're really telling something that's coming from them.
Thank you for that. And Norm, your response got me thinking a lot about short filmmakers. You mentioned Ariane, you mentioned Dusty, and so I'm thinking of the trajectory of those couple of names that you threw out and how they had, 3 or 4 amazing shorts that have all played the festival circuit, both in Toronto and internationally, and how rewarding it is when you are a programmer who either is just really in touch with your shorts team or also does shorts, when you see that trajectory. And I know, big shout out to our opening night film, Doubles, Ian Harnerain. I had seen his short and programmed his short actually when I was at TIFF Film Circuit for year round 10 years ago, and fell in love with it then, and was so excited when I saw it come through from their distributor, and got a note from Ian almost simultaneously. And I think that's one of the most rewarding things in the game for me. And I was wondering if you could each speak a little bit to those synergies within your film festivals, or if that's something you consider is the shorts to features journey and targeting Canadian talent from that stage. I don't want to make you always start. Marina's got the mic. Do you want to start, and then we'll work down and come back to Andrew?
We love to see filmmakers return, and especially we see that they've produced a short, and maybe it could be even another short that comes next, but we see them improving and advancing. We love to see that, and we love to, our programming is not just the film festival, there's a summit prior to the film festival, and we're really trying to launch people within the industry. So we want to, if you've premiered with us before, we always want you to return with your next big project. So we're very pro that.
And I will add to this question too, and if you aren't sourcing and looking at shorts internally, are you in the larger circuit looking elsewhere? Do you want to go next, Richard?
Sure, there's so many questions. I don't know which one to answer. Are we looking for shorts elsewhere? For sure. I know myself, I go to film festivals. I always skim through programs, even if I'm not going to Sundance or South by Southwest or whatever it might be. And I'm like, who are the Canadian filmmakers who are going? Can we maybe tap them next year or this year? So definitely, I'm thinking about that. Definitely staying in touch, or at least trying to keep track of filmmakers who have played here before. And again, it's tricky because I'm doing this for a couple different festivals. But yeah, definitely, once you're on our radar, we want to see you come back, whether it's with another short, another feature, or you're going from features and now you're making a short again. We definitely want to see you. And yeah, if you can connect with us in whatever way, by all means do so. I'm very accessible. send me a message, and I will hopefully respond to it. Although don't do it on Facebook, because I rarely check that. Instagram's good. Does that more or less answer your question?
Yes,
I'm going to move down the line.
Yeah, same. Facebook poison. Everybody wants to sell you shoes. I don't get it. The first thing I did when I was given this gig was spend a week building spreadsheets of tracking of who's got a production in mostly features, because we don't the shorts are a separate domain. Jason Anderson tends to run lead on that, but I've known Jason since the 90s when we both wrote for alt weeklies, so I could just say, does this person have a movie coming up, or am I crazy? And he's like, nope, Ariane here, this there. I mean, Fawzia Mirza's Queen of My Dreams was a short before it was a feature, and now it's opening today across Canada, which is absolutely wonderful. We had a few actually at the festival last year who were short filmmakers first, and it's a terrific pipeline. And when I was at Now, of course, I would do the short roundups every year for the festival, which meant watching everything. So I was on pretty good terms right away with who's active, who's making calling cards versus who's actually telling stories. That's a huge thing in shorts. You can tell within 90 seconds if you're experiencing an original idea or if you're watching an iteration of something. And the ones that really resonate invariably come back, because those people have to make movies. They won't stop, so they'll either make another short or they'll eventually figure out how to do a short. Weirdly enough, Anna Maguire, who stars in With Love in a Major Organ, this
Is a brilliant filmmaker.
tonight premiere. I first saw her as a short filmmaker, and she made an adaptation of a Dave Eggers short story, Your Mother and I, with Don McKellar and Julia Sarah Stone. It was like 15, 16, and it was phenomenal. Seek it out if you haven't seen it. It's 20 minutes long. It's a perfect way to make a short film in a single location with a story that's almost entirely just dialogue and relationships, but it's layered and beautiful and clever. And when the penny drops, when you figure out what's actually going on, it's stunning. It's an incredible accomplishment. And so it's like, I see her name on anything and I will just, follow my way over there. And she's also an actor, so she stars in With Love in a Major Organ, but she's going to make another movie and I'm going to be there for it. And the best thing, honestly, I don't know if you all feel the same way, the best thing about being a programmer is that you can point at something and say, give that to me, I want to see it, and they have to. It's not like, oh, it's not ready, we're not ready to screen it for the press yet. Can you come like Tuesday night at 11 o'clock before the Wednesday opening, because we have no confidence in this movie, but we're screening it as a formality? It's like, no, I get to see it now. And it's exciting, and it's absolutely thrilling to be like the first person to receive something that then you want to project back. So yeah, Jason gave me a quick list of updates on who was making features last year, but it all came up as I was putting this thing together, because the telefilm lists are out and you can see what's in production. It's like, oh, Christian Sparks is working. And you just keep an eye on stuff. And more often than not, the people you expect to pay out will pay out, because they'll be the talents that you've been watching all along.
Amazing. Thank you. Andrew, do you have anything to add in terms of, targeting filmmakers at the short stage in your feature film programming?
So I think over the years, I've been with Inside Out for just over 10 years now. Woo. But what we've noticed and what we've tried to do over the years is reduce as many barriers as possible in terms of queer folks trying to make films, and often the way they get their stories out any way possible. So that usually starts with a short. It's one thing to make the film, but then it's like, how do they get to a festival to present it? And so it's looking at ways to provide or encourage them or help them find support to get to the festival, to be there and network. And pre-COVID, it's fantastic. Like we had, there were people that were just networking so much, they were actually collaborating, and they've since made films together in that. So it's nice to see that happen. But I guess part of that as well, we've been trying to help contribute to building a pipeline for creatives. So this year will be our 8th Queer Finance Forum, and it's the only one that exists right now. And so what we do is...
I was going to say, and it was the first, but only, apparently.
First and only. Yeah, that's me. Yeah, we've had some great success actually. Fozia's film went through our finance forum as well a few years ago. But yeah, so what we do is we're tracking short filmmakers, so they have a couple of shorts, and we're like, hey, how about that feature? And then they get a package together, and then we usually do about 8 to 10 projects a year at the finance forum. And then since then, I think about 40% in 7 years have actually been financed and made, which is pretty good stats. Mutt, I don't know if anyone's seen Mutt. That's now on Netflix. That went through our program. Green of My Dreams went through our program. Something You Said Last Night, Luis's film as well. So yeah, it's been really great because it's like being in this industry for so long, it's like, well, we've got this privilege of knowing so many executives and EPs and sales agents. Like, what do we do with this? And so we're like, let's put them in a room with people who may not know how to get to those people or may have barriers to get to them. And so what is really valuable for us is that when they go into the pitch, there's none of this explaining what a trans experience is to, like, a straight dude or someone who maybe isn't familiar. You don't waste your pitch on explaining what your experience is. You get right down to what the story is and what the finance plan is and stuff. And so that's kind of how part of what we do to track and follow the journey of alumni as well.
I love that. I might ask you to actually expand and kick us off on, you've already touched on this, but speaking a little bit to the filmmakers in this room of what each film that is accepted into your festival can then expect from that festival journey, and how can they best capitalize on getting into Inside Out, Reelworld, Toronto Black Film Fest, TIFF. And obviously you have different levels of markets and financing forums and networking events, but maybe you could start us off or let me know if there's anything you wanted to expand on.
Yeah, I mean, it differs from year to year based on funding and that sort of thing. But, we usually will have like a festival lounge for the week. So this year, our home is the Lightbox. It has been for probably 11 years, I think. So we'll be taking over the gallery space in the atrium this year and have a lounge there for about 8 days of the festival. So within that, 2 of them, we do our finance forum in there, and we'll be doing other, like an industry day that's free for everyone. And we're currently kind of putting that together. Yeah, it was great because last year we introduced, because we're a lot of these queer folks are first-time filmmakers or trying to go from a short to a feature. I'm like, well, while we're in this development process, not yes, you want to get money to make your movie, but let's also think about not just what's on screen, but what's behind the camera as well. So we've incorporated trans film mentorship sessions so that they can start thinking about mentorship on set. So when they're ready to go, they have this already built into their production plan. We also introduced climate storytelling and sustainable production into the industry pieces as well, because we're in this climate. So this is what we're doing. So I think we encourage filmmakers to come, and if they're across Canada, if in case they're not familiar, we'll try to encourage them to go and apply for the travel grants or that kind of thing. If they're not able to go, if it's not built into their plan, if they have a feature and it's already built into their distribution plan or something. But yeah, once they're here, we try to take care of them, and the lounge kind of offers a space to go and just find people like them and chat and talk about movies.
Amazing. Marina?
It's spring today, right? Is it? Is it spring?
Technically. The blizzard I drove through says otherwise.
We have at Reelworld industry programs year round, and it's something everyone should be keeping their eye out for because they're fantastic in that you get a lot of industry exposure within these programs. And one of our longest running ones, the E20 program, really is focused on helping you to advance whatever project you're working on. So these are incredible opportunities that run year round, but at the festival itself, you'll have the opportunity in the summit leading up to the festival to be networking with industry and other filmmakers. And it's really kind of hands-on in terms of getting you that exposure you might not have otherwise in such a short period of time. So it's really condensed, and it can be tiring because you're on all the time, but the feedback we've been getting is that it's thrilling and that we see it working most of all, which is wonderful. And the festival itself, it's an opportunity to see. I try to encourage every filmmaker, whether you've made it into a festival or you're still working on your next project, is to go see what your contemporaries are working on. I think that's Yeah, well, not just competition, but
Or
future
inspiration. Andrew
collaborators.
said competition.
Who do you see collaborating with? So many people make their films by themselves for so long, and which is great, but you don't know what is possible when you start to find your team out there. And I think having a stronger community of filmmakers in Canada is only going to push the industry forward. So go see what your contemporaries are making, and we'll have a Canada New Wave or something like that. They'll name it.
I mean, I would also argue we already do, thanks in large part to the people sitting in front of me. So continue.
Okay, so I'm just going to give a shout out to the Reelworld Summit, which I attended this year. It was a blast. I think it was 2 or 3 days. So yeah, and on top of that, there's like free coffee and food. I met some filmmakers that are actually in this audience and helped them figure out, what their plan was for their short film. So by all means, go to these events, talk to people, network. I really am just going to echo what everyone else said already. It's like, go to the festival, watch the movies, come to these panels, meet people like us, like DM us, hunt us down and all that kind of stuff, and like say, hey, I've got this movie I'm working on, or just, say hi. But yeah, beyond that, I'm like, what else? Just I think introduce yourself to the programmers and just try to make the most of the event. Try to promote your screening as much as possible. And this is something I think they don't really tell you about as a filmmaker, but it's a huge piece. Like if you can show to the film festival, and I don't know that every festival necessarily is on track about this, but if you can show the festival, I can bring an audience to my screening, I think that's useful in the future. Like, Natasha, she's great. She brought out a huge audience to her short film screening, and I can't wait for her to make that magic again next year. Like, we definitely should have her back. Not to say that you need to be like this marketing guru or anything, but like, do a little social media. It's not that bad. I'm an introvert, I hate it, but I do it.
And TIFF obviously has one of the largest industry conferences and markets in the world, so lots to capitalize on there. Norm, do you want to expand?
Yeah, I keep getting asked to do stuff there and not being able to because I have screenings to go to and launch and stuff. I did do some Filmmakers Lab stuff this year, which was a lot of fun, but that's a little more self-selecting. But as the Programmer of Industry Selects, I can... for those of you who aren't familiar with Industry Selects, it's basically their elevated market screenings. They're given their own little section on the industry website. They're given a little more pop, a little more promotion, and the people the filmmakers who are invited get a discounted rate on the market screening. So it's basically just the general pitch is these are the movies that we would have put in the festival proper, but for whatever reason. Sometimes it's the inability to find the right program. Sometimes it's the filmmaker who said, no, we had a UK production called Cloak and Loiter 2 years ago, executive produced by Ben Wheatley, really great thriller, small movie, directed by Neil Maskell, who's an actor who's been in a lot of his, and he just really wanted to premiere in London. So we couldn't have it in Toronto. And we got it through industry because I just wanted to nudge it onto, because I'd seen it and I loved it and I really wanted people to know about it. I tried to get a couple of Canadian films in there. Last year we only had one. I think The Boy in the Woods was the one we did. And it's a window into what the industry, it's us trying to figure out what the industry wants. And obviously TIFF's industry connections are preposterous in scale. Like they're just unimaginable. We sold The Holdovers 2 years ago at an industry screening that I was not involved with. It was booked before I even had the gig. But Alexander Payne knew he had the film ready to go, but he didn't want to put it on the festival circuit without a little more time. I think he just didn't want to release a film in 2022 for whatever reason. Mm-hmm. So we had the industry screening. Focus bought it for $30 million. I think either before the festival started or the day the festival started, and everybody wins with a situation like that. I can take no credit for it. I really, even though my name's on the industry thing, it wasn't me. But that's the sort of thing that gets all the attention. What doesn't get all the attention is all the other stuff, the massive infrastructure of the industry conferences that we have. And those are, not only are they really interesting and advantageous, I think, to go to and to, I hate the word schmooze, but that is what the festival is for. And on the industry side, you can meet people there who don't know you exist and might be interested in the thing that you have. Industry passes aren't that expensive, so I would just see people lining up outside, the CBC to go see Guillermo del Toro talk about fantasy for an hour, which I would totally line up for if I didn't have somewhere else to be that day. And just meeting each other and talking. And the thing that I remember as a journalist from the earliest days of TIFF, like in the earliest days when I was covering it, like 92, 93, before we actually had segmented press and industry screenings and you just went to see the movie with the audience, is that everybody talks in line. And buzz is generated that way in a genuine, authentic way that doesn't happen when you try to manufacture it. Right? Like everyone in this room has gotten something from someone who is selling an idea that isn't all the way there. And that stuff doesn't last. But the conversations you hear from two people ahead of you talking about the movie they just saw that they love, that you suddenly now really need to see, that happens at the industry conferences now. But it's not about movies, it's about projects, it's about people. And I think that's something TIFF does, not better than anyone else necessarily, but there's more light on it somehow, I guess, just because of the scale of the festival. And it feels so weird to be part of it on the inside instead of on the outside covering it, because on the outside everybody has opinions and everybody, like, it's so much easier to work on the inside of the festival than it is to run around reporting on it. I'm sorry, it makes me feel lazy.
Sorry, Marina has something to add, but I do also just want to add myself. Everyone who's in this room who's based in Toronto should definitely be taking advantage of the fact that one of the top 5, depending on who you ask, top 3 festivals in the world is in this city. And so certainly you should be taking advantage of the industry programming in that conference, both during the festival and year round. There's so much going on. And also some of the big festivals, like you guys, have publicists. So if you don't have it in your budget to hire a publicist, which I definitely recommend, especially depending on the tier of festival you premiere at, to maximize on that momentum, or a festival strategist, see if the festival has one in-house. They often do. They have one that specializes in each region, and they certainly have one for Canada if it's a Canadian festival of that scale. And Marina, you wanted to add?
Yeah, what Richard was talking about, and just echoing what you're talking about, publicizing your film. Even when you're not at TIFF and you're getting the media attention that TIFF gets, there are ways to push your film forward, even in a local way, to even attract an audience to that screening, or to just let people know what you're working on. And I think it's evolving, because where people are going to read and listen to their daily news or pop culture, whatever, is changing. But it is more on the filmmaker these days, I think, especially when you're independent, to start to cultivate your audience. And this is something Reelworld is interested in exploring more. And I think it's important for the people sitting here today to also have that dialogue with us, because we do see that happen. The shorts filmmakers historically have a great community. They come out and see each other's films, and there's buzz created that way. But even I always think, someone's coming with a film and they're from, a small town in Manitoba. Your local paper might be interested in doing a story about you. That's in a very basic way. You can now online, you can cultivate an audience that's national, especially if you're doing something that has like a special interest that other people around the world might be also interested in. So creative ways of just even letting people know what you're working on, and that process can be important. And I'm happy you brought it up.
Can I just sort of piggyback on that? So with that in mind, like if you are from Manitoba or wherever and you're trying to have this screening in Toronto, there's nothing to prevent you from trying to find the community in Toronto that relates to your film. So just like I'm also a filmmaker, so on a personal level, I did this with one of my shorts. We were screening in St. Louis, and the St. Louis Film Festival has been very nice to me. They've screened a bunch of my films over the years, but this was the first time I was going in person. I did manage to laser target a group in St. Louis to be like, hey, I'm doing this documentary on mixed race identity, and I'm a mixed race person. I would love it if your group could come out to this screening. And it worked. I got a handful of extra people to come out to the screening. And so when you're there with the programmers and you're showing them, hey, look, I actually did this thing to get an audience, I think that's helpful.
Absolutely. And I would say, especially at a festival like this one, where we're focusing on emerging to mid-level filmmakers. I mean, we've got some veterans, don't get me wrong, but we're really very open to collaboration. And so if a filmmaker comes to us and says, hey, I'm connected to this community, this local college is my community, or I have a connection at this local consul general or community center or whatever it might be, so open to that. So definitely there are advantages to the scale of film festival that you're at in every way. It's just about finding and seeking out what that advantage is. And a few of you also touched on community and like finding your collaborators and sort of a class. And like I was going to mention Anna, for instance, she also was in the films, the short films of like every huge Canadian feature filmmaker right now. And you can see that like cogency and you can see that voice. And even though they're so diverse, there is something happening right now that is a new wave in Canadian cinema, which is so cool. Like for Top 10, it's one of the first years it's almost all new voices, if not all.
Sorry. I was really proud of that, but it had nothing to do with us. Like that is the Talent to Watch program. That is the ability now of people who couldn't tell their stories at this scale, even 5 years ago, getting a shot. I also think we're in a really remarkable spot right now where post-pandemic, the films of 2022 were mostly shot beforehand or just beforehand. And then they spent a year in the edit because they couldn't do anything with them, and people refined their message and made their movies sharper. The films I saw in 2023 were films that were written during the pandemic, and people rewrote obsessively and found the core and figured out how to make the movie under the limitations that didn't exist by the time they actually started shooting. And so we have this incredible little moment of like a pressure cooker on creativity. I don't know if we're going to see it again. I'm really curious to see what 2024 looks like in that landscape. I've seen a couple of films already that definitely benefited from, well, I only have a house and I only have 5 people, and what do I do? And sometimes that is, sometimes the worst case scenario is you get 5 actors yelling at each other because there's no script, really. But sometimes you get 5 actors yelling at each other in exquisitely written and conceived and directed ways. And I just saw something like that made me very excited. But I don't know that that's going to be a defining principle. Cronenberg's got a new movie coming out, and I'm really looking forward to that. I'm not exclusively chasing young new voices, but they're really loud right now, and I'm hearing a lot of it, and I'm kind of loving it.
We are.
Give yourselves a hand with the young people.
Yeah. Thank you to you guys for
We
making
want to
this all
see your
happen.
films, Young Voices.
But yeah, just expanding on that point, I'm so excited to hear you all talking about that process, because I think it's often overlooked when I will ask a room like this or have been in your seats. When that question is asked, talking about how to get the most out of your festival, people often exclusively talk about how to meet buyers, how to meet distributors, how to make connections. But yeah, I think a big part of it is finding your team, finding your collaborators, finding your school. It becomes like a class that travels around the festival circuit year over year, and you learn so much from watching other people's films, which a couple of you touched on. Could you guys all speak a little bit about how the people in this room should go about defining what their goals are and navigating that process, starting, I'd say, right from the submission stage through to festival acceptance? Is your goal to get your film sold? Is it to find future collaborators? Is it to get inspired? What do you suggest that people do? What would your one piece of advice be? Andrew, do you want to start off? Goal setting?
I mean, that's a very full question. I guess it depends, like if it's a shorter feature, but let's say in this instance, you have a first feature, you've made a few shorts, you've done the festival circuit minimally. I think honestly, I'm going to sound like, the arty guy, but like, I think really it depends what you want to get out of it. I think why are you making your art in the first place? Why are you making this film in the first place? If you're making it to be Quentin Tarantino, I'm sorry, it's probably not going to happen. But if you're making it to like get something out because you are a creative and you feel you have a unique voice within Canada, within your community, then get that story out there. So that is, I think, what should drive you in terms of figuring out where you want to play it and where that community exists that you want to find in other parts of the world. So I think just like doing your research, I think times are changing. I know like a lot of Canadians still think like TIFF is the be all end all, and the TIFF program is smaller now. Hot Docs is smaller now, and so I think it's opened up opportunities for people to think further about where their film can play or should play, and where they can find their community. And I think that that's really important too, which has helped kind of level a bit of a playing field, I think, for Canadian work and emerging work as well. So yeah, I think it's really about like do the research festivals, figure out like don't just be like, oh, I want to go to Taiwan and then like submit to like a short festival in Taiwan. It's like you could do that, but it's kind of probably a waste of time because then you have to get there as well. But like I think think about who you want to see the film, and if your goal is getting a sales agent or that kind of thing, then TIFF Industries, like that is where you go and try to find those people. But do the research and like just kind of know what you're talking about when you go into those spaces, because if you go in and you're like your film is finished, you've got a what are those sticks, like USB stick and like a big printout catalog of like your pitch deck, it's like that's not going to work. No one wants that. I think what people want is like to engage in a conversation. They want to hear, if they're going to give you 2 minutes, then you're going to get an elevator pitch in there somehow. But be engaging, know what your story is, know what your voice is, because chances are it's not going to be the film that you've made that they're interested in. It's going to be what you're making after that. And so I think what you're doing is you're starting to build these relationships, and that's what's really key. So like do that research, figure out where you can find that community to play the film, and then travel from there, because programmers talk. we're gossips. So it's like if you're like loved at one festival and there's programmers there, we're going to recommend it to other festivals. So like you can get a year travel out of that film if it's good and if you're a good person.
And it goes both ways.
Yeah, exactly.
Marina, festival goal setting and festival strategy.
Very well
Key
said.
advice.
Everything you said. And I'll just add, don't be afraid to maybe talk to other filmmakers and ask about their experiences at different festivals and what they got out of it, especially if you see yourself in them. And because it is very personal, where stage you're at and where you're going to go next. Some festivals are really great about bringing industry together, and some are just screening vehicles when you think of all the festivals around the world. I'm going to take it even a step back, because I know you're going to get good answers from the remaining panelists. When you're thinking and envisioning your idea, I think today you need to ask yourself, is this a series? Is this a film? Is this an audio narrative, an audio story? What's your budget? What's your vision for your project? And where does that project need to start? Because we know you can adapt a short to a feature. Is your idea best played as a series on YouTube or potentially for something like a Netflix? Starting to ask where that brilliant idea you have, where it will play best, can also help you develop that idea over time. So I would say really think about that, because sometimes the vision you have, if you don't quite yet have the tools to see it through, it doesn't mean you can't start it somewhere. And I'll leave it at that.
That's a great point. That's one of the reasons why Tribeca, where I'm lucky enough to be part of the shorts team, is now Tribeca Festival and not Tribeca Film Festival, because storytelling isn't just one thing. Richard, do you want to talk about festival strategy, festival goal setting? I know there are many tips you could give, but try to hone in on a couple.
I just feel like everyone's already covered a lot of good territory here, but I mean, I'll just add that Film Freeway is a nightmare. There are so many film festivals, and I will say this, a lot of them are not legitimate. You might end up going to a film festival in Arkansas that like literally is a conference center and someone set up a bad DVD player. You probably don't want to go to that festival. So really, like, again, as I said, like interrogate those festivals and like where you want to like start your festival journey, and do have like a legitimate roadmap. Say, if I complete post-production on July 1st, what are the festivals that I want to target and why? I know everyone wants to go to like, Sundance and TIFF and all these, apparently. You want to go to all these famous film festivals, and good for you. But yeah, ask yourself if that's really where your film belongs. Again, is that where you're going to find your audience? Like, does your audience live there? Because if they don't, then, there's something to be said for boosting your ego, for sure. But like, is that the best strategy for your film? And really interrogate that And if you can, find someone who is maybe on this side of the table or somewhere else in the film industry, and like have them watch your film and give you some honest critiques, because you may save yourself a lot of time and money submitting to festivals that way. Because well, so always ask for waivers is a tricky comment, because I know some people are divided on this issue. As a filmmaker, I say, always ask for waivers, but I know some people get annoyed by it. But I would say always have a trailer ready if you're going to ask for a waiver, if you anticipate like running into one of us, and be open to the idea of like having a screener ready, like, and ready to go. So that if you say, Richard, I want you to watch my film, I'm like, well, let me see the trailer first. I like it. I want to see the screener. And if you're like, well, it's password protected and I'm not really showing it just yet, I'm like, I want to sit with you and watch it. I'm like, that's not going to work. This is legitimately what someone said to me. And I'm like, I understand why you're protective of your film, but like, if you want us to watch it and like potentially give you feedback, then you have to be open to us. So yeah.
I will just add too, if you already have the relationship, so if you've been programmed here by Richard and our team and you're interested in playing one of his other festivals, it's a very higher success rate than the cold emails that you get that you can tell are en masse and aren't well researched. If it's like, Norm, I read this piece you wrote, it changed my life, it's a lot more likely to go the distance than if it's well, I won't speak for you, but maybe you're too busy for those still. But the mass emails, I do say I tend to filter out myself. Do you want to jump in?
I was going to say the filmmakers who, and it's happened to me as well. Can I show it to you in my specific screening room, because only my sound design is going to work here. What I'm hearing when people say that, and I understand that every single creator believes in their film. Every single movie ever made is the most important movie they've made to that date, and I get that. I know how that's like. You need to have an ego in order to make movies. You need to have self-confidence in order to put something on a screen in front of people and assume they're going to be moved or changed or affected by it. But when you say, I can only show this movie to you in this one specific way, it tells me you don't have the confidence in the film on its own. If you are trying to impose conditions, you are creating a barrier between the art and the recipient. And since we are the first people to see that movie, that's a bad deal to make for us. So don't do that. Don't impose conditions. Don't demand things. No matter who you are, you can have a shelf full of Canadian Screen Awards, and if you're coming at me in that way, I'm not going to have any faith in the product that you are currently pushing. The other thing I was going to say is, think about the movies that you have really loved, that you have seen at festivals. Think about which festivals those played at. Think about how the audiences received them. As much as I do genuinely believe that TIFF is a fantastic place to launch movies, we screen, I think, 280 films, and not all of them land with the audience they need, because there's 5 other things happening at that given moment, and there's a confluence of events in any given day where, like if Taylor Swift is outside the light box, no one's paying attention to anything that's happening at the Scotiabank. And I was almost crushed to death in that stampede. It's a rough memory for me. But I do. Well, I was dumb enough to try to return a bike share bike to a dock, and the dock was full, so I thought, I'll just walk it across King Street. That'll be fine. And there were 10,000 people on King Street that I hadn't noticed. But giant festivals with massive footprints are full of distractions. And if you only have 2 screenings, maybe let's say 2 screenings of a very small, very intimate film with no stars that doesn't have a thing that's going to direct everyone in that moment, then maybe a film with a little less competition for a festival, rather, with a little less competition for attention is the right way to go. And you can start the ball rolling that way. You can premiere at a smaller festival that only has 2 or 3 shows at any given moment instead of 10, and the odds are better that your film will find its audience. And a lot of that is marketing, and a lot of that is promotion, and a lot of that is everything else involved in getting your movie into a festival. But strategy and targeting is an absolutely perfectly good way to have an impact on the long term, but you just really need to commit to that long-term plan rather than, it's like applying to colleges. I'm only gonna. Anybody see I Like Movies, Chandler Levack's film?
Yes.
That
Closing
whole
night
thing,
at Seattle.
That whole thing is about him getting into NYU, and he doesn't, and he has absolutely no backup plan. Have a backup plan. Don't just say and don't tell us that we're the only festival you want to attend. It's entirely possible that it's true, but it sounds like a line, right? Like it just puts us on a position of, oh, well, you're delusional, or you're not planning ahead, or you're desperate. And again, like every festival you apply to is looking for a great movie. It's not like we're going to reject the film out of hand if it doesn't have Bradley Cooper in it. And none of us is going to put Bradley Cooper in a movie, not this year. And we're not looking for that. We're looking for a story that's new and different, or an old story that's different and new. We're looking for an aesthetic. We're looking for confidence. We're looking for talent. And that comes through. But don't hang all your hopes on a single film festival, because you're betting against yourself.
And I would argue that if you took Norm's advice and found a film to model yourself after that had kind of a dream run, that touched on similar themes and it had a similar aesthetic and visual sensibility and similar audience segments, you'll see it didn't just play those big splashy festivals you saw at it. It also played places that were culturally resonant for it. It also played places that were local to its birth, Toronto in this case, so all of these festivals. And that should always be a part of your festival trajectory, no matter where that premiere status starts. So never, ever forget that important missing piece of like connecting with your local community and connecting with the audience that you made your film for. Having said that, we do have time for an audience question to end things off. Is there anyone with a burning question? Right here.
You were just talking about choosing your festivals. From what I understand, some of the major festivals, they want world premieres. And if you screen it somewhere else first, even if it's a smaller festival, you can get locked out of that festival. Unless it's your country of origin, from what I understand. What are your thoughts on that?
So just to repeat for anyone in the back as well as for our content capture, excuse me, the question was just in regards to premiere status and how that process works, which is of course different for everyone up here, but it seemed like you were looking at Norm. So do you want to speak to TIFF?
Well, I'm a Canadian programmer, so I can only speak to our approach to Canadian films, but we program films that premiere elsewhere in the world. We had, I think there was a Canadian film from South by in 22 that had premiered in Texas first, and last year we had In Flames, which premiered in Cannes and then came to Toronto. We do want the world premiere if we can get it, because that's just how we prefer things, but we're also not going to lock a film out. That said, if you played in Sudbury or Ottawa, or Sudbury comes after us in the calendar, so that's a bad example. But if the film has already played here, if it was at Hot Docs or Inside Out, then the odds are much, much lower, simply because it's already premiered to a Toronto audience. It's not a hard and fast rule, and sometimes I'm sure there have been exceptions where something rebounds, but not in my memory. I think mostly because the sense is that if a film is played twice at a Toronto Film Festival, that audience has seen it. And so we are more likely to get an audience in for something new or something that hasn't played in this city. And it's simply a question of will people come to a second festival screening, not a second festival screening, but a second festival that is screening the same film that already played in the city. So yeah, I would say that it's a much longer shot. But I would also, I can't say never. I don't know. I haven't seen, if I see a film that's that good that played on a tiny frame, within a tiny frame at another festival 6 months earlier, it might be worth fighting for. I generally don't want to rule anything out until I actually see the film.
Did anyone else want to add to that?
Yeah, I think, again, as a specialty festival, we don't demand premieres really. Again, it's mainly Toronto because, often there's crossover with Hot Docs. So, when Shane was there we'd always kind of meet and discuss, and we'd work together, and that they would limit the number of screenings so that if there was something that they were showing that we also wanted to show, we could still do that, and we'd each kind of find our community between the festivals. Yeah, I feel like, aside from maybe some of the A-list festivals, the whole premiere status thing has changed since COVID, and it's really become, because there are so many smaller movies that are being made, and the opportunities are there for emerging level and for more diverse people to kind of get into the industry and make kind of lower budget films. I feel like it's more about getting them seen than the premiere status, because we also don't have the infrastructure like we used to have for like media to report on them, and so that kind of thing, everything has changed. And the real estate, just to rent a cinema, for if you're putting a festival together, like that has all increased exponentially too. So it's like if it's already played in the city, you're probably not going to do it again because you want to give that space that you're paying an arm and a leg for to a film that is newer kind of thing. But it is, yeah, it is a bit frustrating as a specialty festival when people get caught up in their premiere status, right? Because it means people that can demand it, it means something different than people that can't really demand it, but it's a nice to have kind of thing. But I feel like everyone plays nice, especially in the city as well, which is really nice too, because it tends to come down to the artist and the filmmaker, the content. But
Definitely. I think that was a quick one. We could do one more question. No, we can't. Sorry, I'm sorry. So on that note, I will just say that it has been such a pleasure to have all of you here and to hear all of your wisdom. I'm sure there'll be lots of people who want to corner you if and only if you have the time and energy. We should try and move out into the lobby, because I know we have a high turnover rate here. But I also want to thank all of you for coming, and thank you so much for making this festival happen, the people in this room.
Thank you all. Like, film programmer royalty right here, everybody. Thank you so much to all of you for coming out. While I just have everybody here, I also just really want to send a huge thank you to our tech team in the back, Adam and Matt, who have helped every SB seen and heard all week. You're amazing. And they are going to tell me to stop talking right now because we need to get prepared for our final industry event, which is making a Canadian classic with a spotlight on Cube with director Vincenzo Natali and Warren Pisanoda coming up next at 2:30 promptly. So we'll see you back in the theater for that. And thank you, Reelworld, for getting the word out again, our community partners. Thank you all.